You mentioned the budgets and the militarization of police. One of the people that I find very interesting in all this commentary about what's going on with the police and too much brutality and the conflict with society is he says, instead of defunding the police, you should actually be increasing the funding, because right now a lot of police officers are getting less training than somebody that's required to be a beautician. And his proposition, the idea that he put forward is 20% of a police officer's time should be spent in training. And to do that, you are going to have to really increase the amount of money you put there, because not only do you have to pay for those officers to get training, but if you've just removed 20% of your officer's time from being a beat cop or being a detective, now you've got to replace that. Is that a reasonable idea, or is that one that sounds reasonable but doesn't really work in the modern age?
Well, it sounds reasonable, and I would like for us to get to a point where it could logistically work. You know, a law enforcement officer, for the most part, is one of the most expensive government employees that there is. If you look at the workers' comp and the cost of driving around for 8 or 12 hours, if you look at the salary, if you look at the benefits, you know, the retirement benefits, one of the most expensive government employees out there. But then you look at some of the other government services that might have changed their paradigm in the last 20, 30 years. And I'll use mental health, for example. In California in 1991, there was a huge realignment of mental health services, and they were switched from the state responsibility to the county's responsibility. And so as this happened, most counties said, well, okay, we're going to take this money and we're going to make our own Department of Mental Health or Department of Behavioral Services, whatever it is. And they said, well, you know, at 2 o'clock in the morning, are we going to send people out to deal with someone who's, you know, acting bizarrely? And they're going to say, no, we're not going to send them from mental health, because people call 911 and the sheriff's office or the police departments are out there 24/7. And so we'll have them do it. And it sounds really good on paper. And maybe in the presentation, it sounds really good. But here I want to give you the worst case example. Let's talk about a 21-year-old police officer. He's carrying a gun and a badge. He's only been out of the house for maybe 18 months. He's lived with mom and dad, you know, his entire life. And now 18 months he's been out of the house. He has the complete power of that mayor, or the complete power of that board of supervisors, board of commissioners from the county. And he is the one that's going to be making a decision on a person's mental health status. And he has the signature authority to put this person in a mental health facility for 72 hours. Well, that's a great example of what we're talking about, of putting so much responsibility on law enforcement when other people are at home comfortably in their beds. And if something goes wrong, people are going to say, why did the cops do this? Well, that's not the question that I would be asking. I would say, why are we sending the cops to do this? Why don't we let law enforcement investigate burglaries and take care of bad drivers on the road? And if there's a person who's having an emotional, psychotic breakdown, probably the most significant psychotic breakdown in their life, he or she doesn't want to see a 21-year-old kid showing up saying, I'm going to have to put handcuffs on you and I'm going to have to take you to the emergency room. And then once we get to the emergency room, then you're going to talk to a doctor and he's going to talk to a psychiatrist. Vance, 3 years ago, I did a non-scientific, non-official survey in Mendocino County. And we have 3 police departments and the sheriff's office. And I gave all the dispatchers this 30-second form to fill out for 30 days and said, listen, for the next 30 days on every mental health call, will you just mark down if the person had a weapon or if the person was threatening to hurt themselves or hurt others? And the results were very interesting. 34% of all mental health calls involved no weapons, involved nobody saying that they were going to hurt themselves or hurt someone else. Yet we're sending law enforcement there, the problem solvers of society, we're sending law enforcement there to deal with grandpa who's sitting on his porch and he's acting out. And that's not the best solution. So if somebody wants to keep law enforcement doing the extra things that they do, going and checking building permits, and yes, there's municipalities that have police officers going and making sure a building permit is, yes, or doing mental health, or, removing a skunk from underneath the porch. If you want to have law enforcement do that, then I would say you need to step up the training / funding. But if you say, well, listen, why don't we go back to having mental health professionals being able to respond 24/7, then maybe law enforcement doesn't have to have increased funding because you're decreasing their responsibility. Now, I have never met a law enforcement officer who doesn't want to go to a situation, mental health situation, where somebody has a weapon and somebody may be threatening someone else, because law enforcement will go there because that's what we're paid to do. We have the bulletproof vests and we have the training, and I'm not saying we have the gun. We have other things. We have, we can tase them, we can do whatever, we can verbal judo them until we can get them to calm down. But if a person doesn't have a gun and badge, and the law enforcement officer gets there, and the guy picks up a candlesticks and threatens a law enforcement officer, and law enforcement officer shoots him, once again, they're going to say, why'd you shoot him? And I'm going to say, why was he even there to start with? Why didn't we send the correct response unit? And so whether it's a crisis response team, which Mendocino County is putting together a crisis response team of non-sworn employees of the sheriff's office working with behavioral health. And what they're doing, Vance, is there's frequent flyers in the mental health system. As you can imagine, there's frequent flyers. And this team goes out once a week and physically checks on the person. And they don't get on the radio. It's not public. They're not broadcasting for people with scanners to know, they're checking on the nut guy down the road again. They're not doing that. They're showing up in unmarked vehicles. They're asking them, have you taken your meds? Have you talked to your parents? You have clean clothes? You have food? All this stuff. And what we're seeing now, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, is a 95% decrease in the frequent flyers because of this personalized attention. And we're no longer sending our most expensive government employees to take care of this person. And it's a huge win-win. So don't just say defund the police. I would say take away some of the law enforcement officers' responsibility and allow them to do what they went to school to do. Now think of this, Vance. Police academies in California are 6 months long. And for 6 months, they have probably 50 instructors that come in. Some people talking about domestic violence, some people talking about how to use a fire extinguisher, some people teaching you how to use your baton, your gun, and all this kind of stuff. But all of those instructors are saying, listen, that world's a crazy world. Be ready to protect yourself. Going home to family is the most important thing of the day. And it is. But when these kids get out of the police academy, they're scared to death. Some instructors taught me, don't ever shake hands with someone because they might put you in an arm lock, and take away your gun. Or they say, if you go into someone's house and they offer you a cup of coffee, don't ever drink that coffee because they might poison it. Well, you know what? I have found all that to be bunk. I have gone to houses when I was a deputy sheriff, I was also a deputy coroner. And when grandpa dies at 2 a.m. and you go in and talk to grandma and she offers you a cup of coffee, I told my deputy sheriff when I was sheriff, you better damn well sit down and have that cup of coffee because she needs someone to talk with. And if you say no, you're just going to be a cold, heartless bureaucrat who's going to say, what was his name? What was his social security number? All right, I've called the mortuary and they're going to be here in a minute to pick him up. And what a traumatic event for a family. So,
well, I mean, you're talking about two things that are central to the human experience. And it doesn't really matter. Most cultures you go to, whether it's shaking hands or some other form of, hey, I am here and I am clearly here only as a human being talking with you and accepting something to drink. Every other culture I've ever been in, whether it's in Latin America or Africa, to deny accepting a hot drink to spend some time with while it's hot would completely break down the fabric of the way that you communicate with other people. But you can also see why there's an instructor that says, hey, my job is to make sure these 22-year-old kids that have a wife and a new baby make it home. So I'm going to give them every ounce of protection that I can.
Sure.
You can understand why it would happen.
I agree wholeheartedly. I was a training officer for many years, and I wanted to instill upon my young cadets that they could use their gut feeling. And, you know, if they felt good about it, then do it. If they didn't feel good about it, don't do it. It's okay. We're humans, we're not robots. And we have that internal flow chart to figure things out.
Thanks for checking out this podcast short. If you're interested in the subjects that we're talking about or the idea of how do you get better at communications, you may want to consider joining the Articulate Ventures Network. There, listeners like you can meet other listeners from all over the world. You can put up talks that you've given to ask for feedback and ways to improve, and you can even take courses that'll help you become a tangibly better communicator. That's the Articulate Ventures Network with the link below.